Carol Burnett's life was a mix of hardship, determination, talent, and unforgettable moments, both on and off the stage. Behind the laughter that made her one of America's most beloved entertainers was a personal history filled with challenges, pain, and perseverance that most people never saw. From a childhood shaped by poverty and instability to the dizzying heights of television fame, her story is one of survival, resilience, and the ability to turn personal struggle into art that touched millions. Her road to success was anything but easy. Even as she built a career full of groundbreaking performances, unforgettable sketches, and a warm, approachable charm, there were moments of deep heartbreak and difficult choices. One of the hardest decisions she ever made involved her daughter, Carrie. Carrie had struggled for years with addiction, and Carol, desperate to help her, sent her to 2 different rehabilitation centers. The second time, she admitted her against her will, knowing Carrie would hate her for it. Carol didn't do it out of control or judgment, she did it out of love and fear. In the years that followed, she would sometimes talk about that decision, how necessary it had been and how much pain it had caused. She knew Carrie saw it as betrayal at first, but Carol hoped that, in time, her daughter would understand it came from a place of wanting her to live. As a performer, Carol seemed to love almost everyone she worked with. She was known for her kindness, patience, and the way she encouraged people around her. But there was one co-star during the 7th season of her hit show whose behavior crossed a line she couldn't forget. This person's attitude on set turned mean, targeting guest stars and humiliating them in front of the cast and crew. Carol, who valued respect and collaboration, tried to stop the behavior. The confrontation turned physical, leaving the entire set stunned. It was a betrayal that cut deeply because this co-star had been with her for years. Their relationship never recovered, and Carol carried the sting of that moment with her. Long before the glitz of Hollywood, Carol Burnett's life began in far humbler surroundings. She was born on April 26, 1933, in a crumbling San Antonio hospital. Her birth certificate didn't even list an address, a quiet sign of the instability that would shape her childhood. Both her parents were already heavy drinkers when she was born, and by the time she was 4, alcohol was a daily presence in their lives. Her mother's anger often turned violent, and young Carol learned to hide under beds to escape the shouting and flying tempers. The neighbors, aware of how little food there was in the house, often brought meals for her. Looking back, Carol would say she hadn't had much of a childhood, it had been survival from the start. The loneliness of those years stuck with her for life, and she could remember even decades later how invisible she sometimes felt in her own home. Her parents' marriage didn't last. Her father walked out when she was 2 years old, and by the time she was 6, the divorce was final. The court cited drunkenness and neglect as the main reasons for the split. Carol had to sit through parts of the legal proceedings, and it left her feeling like she didn't matter. Her mother remained bitter after the divorce, and her father, who had moved to Los Angeles, only drank more heavily. In the midst of that chaos, Carol developed a gift that would later become the foundation of her career, the ability to watch, listen, and study people. Even in difficult moments, she noticed details, behaviors, and quirks that would later help her create the memorable characters that audiences adored. After the divorce, Carol and her half-sister Chrissy were sent to live with their grandmother. Their new home was far from glamorous, a tiny, windowless room in a run-down Hollywood boarding house. The rent was $9 a week. The bathroom was down the hall and shared with other tenants. Mice sometimes darted across the floor at night. They survived on her grandmother's $30 a month Social Security check. Despite the lack of comfort, Carol made the best of it. She turned broken pieces of furniture into toys, read books that other people had thrown away, and went to free radio show tapings for entertainment. In 1941, Los Angeles County estimated that 7% of children were considered neglected. By all accounts, Carol could have easily been one of them. When she was 8 years old, Carol's imagination took a unique turn. She invented an imaginary twin sister named Karen. In her mind, Karen had curly blonde hair, perfect dimples, and a life full of charm and adventure. Sometimes, Carol would run out the front door, change outfits behind the building, and come back pretending to be Karen. She kept up this act for nearly 2 years. She even invited Karen to a birthday party once, which confused everyone. One neighbor eventually wrote to her grandmother, suggesting that Carol needed help. But to Carol, this wasn't troubling. It was her first experiment with improvisation, storytelling, and acting. Around the same time, she began practicing her now famous Tarzan yell. Standing on the rooftop, she would imitate the jungle call from old movies, shouting until neighbors came running or police stopped by to see what was going on. It may have started as a game, but over time, her voice grew stronger, her lung capacity expanded, and it became a trademark she could perform on command for the rest of her life. Her grandmother had a peculiar habit when they went to the movies together. After the show, she would quietly take toilet paper from the theater's restroom and tuck it into her purse. They couldn't afford to buy their own, so it was one of the many little ways they made ends meet. Carol remembered these moments clearly. Years later she could laugh about them, but at the time, they were just part of survival. Movies themselves were more than entertainment for her. For a dime, she could sit through double features and escape into other worlds. She didn't just watch passively, she studied the actors, the timing of scenes, and the way the audience reacted. Those darkened theaters became her classroom. When she eventually parodied movies like Gone with the Wind on her show, she was drawing directly from those early experiences. At home, music brought moments of peace. Her grandmother could play the piano, and sometimes her mother would pick up a ukulele. They would sing songs like You Are My Sunshine, and for a little while, the poverty and arguments faded into the background. Carol learned how to harmonize at that kitchen table, which gave her the confidence to sing in front of others. One conversation with her mother stuck with her for life. When Carol told her she wanted to be an actress, her mother replied, "You can always write, no matter what you look like." Carol remembered those words exactly, and they stung deeply. In that moment, she realized her mother didn't think she was beautiful enough for acting. Instead of crushing her spirit, it made her more determined to prove that talent mattered more than looks. By the early 1950s, Carol's father was in poor health, ravaged by years of drinking. In 1954, Carol left for New York to chase her acting dream. Not long after, her father died at 47 from liver failure. She said he was never mean, just lost. While her own life was beginning, his had already ended. Carol's big break started in an unexpected way. In her junior year at UCLA, she was preparing for her final theater exam when her professor suddenly cancelled it. Instead, he asked her and a few classmates to perform skits at a party for other faculty members. She was nervous, she had been worrying about money and wasn't sure she'd ever get a real chance in show business. But that night, she improvised a comedy sketch and performed it in front of a room full of professors. Their laughter wasn't polite, it was genuine, and it was the first time she saw adults in authority genuinely entertained by her humor. After the performance, she quietly began slipping cookies from the refreshment table into her purse, not out of greed, but because she was hungry and wanted to take some home to her grandmother. She froze when an older man in a suit approached her, thinking he might scold her. Instead, he praised her performance and started a conversation. That chance meeting changed her life. The man turned out to be a wealthy shipbuilder from La Jolla. He offered Carol and her friend Don Soroyan a loan of $1,000 each to go to New York and pursue their dreams. The only conditions were that they repay it within 5 years, keep his identity secret forever, and, if they succeeded, help other young performers the same way. There was no contract, just a handshake. Carol accepted without hesitation and later paid him back to the exact day, keeping his identity secret for life. With the money, she and Don dropped out of UCLA in 1954, packed their things, and took a train to New York. They lived frugally in a small apartment, surviving on cheap meals while attending auditions. In 1959, Carol landed her breakout role in the Broadway musical Once Upon a Mattress, earning a Tony nomination and staying with the show for its entire run. Her career quickly gained momentum. She joined The Gary Moore Show in 1959, becoming known for her range in sketch comedy. In 1962, she won her first Emmy Award and starred alongside Julie Andrews in the TV special Julie and Carol at Carnegie Hall, which became a huge success. Her personal life, however, was complicated. She married Don Soroyan in 1955, but they divorced in 1962 as her career took off. The following year, she married television producer Joe Hamilton, with whom she had 3 daughters, Carrie, Jody, and Erin. Their marriage lasted until 1984, during which time Joe produced The Carol Burnett Show, which debuted in 1967 and became one of television's most beloved variety shows. Her happiest moments as a mother were mixed with deep sorrow. She suffered a miscarriage in 1965 and later endured the heartbreak of watching Carrie battle addiction for years before losing her to cancer in 2002 at just 38 years old. Carol's life was a constant balancing act between public laughter and private pain. Her story is a testament to resilience, to finding joy even when life is difficult, and to the power of kindness and generosity, qualities she both received and gave throughout her life. Carol's early years in New York were full of struggle, but also full of moments that kept her going. Every day was about survival, how to stretch a single dollar for food, how to pay rent, how to stay hopeful after rejection. She would walk for hours to auditions, often in shoes that were starting to fall apart. On days when she didn't have enough for a proper meal, she'd make herself a feast out of crackers and tap water, convincing herself that hunger was just part of the price you paid for following a dream. It wasn't glamorous. In fact, it was exhausting. But she was determined not to go back to Los Angeles without having tried everything. She had promised the shipbuilder who loaned her the money that she would give it her all. That promise pushed her to keep showing up, even when her confidence wavered. Theater auditions were competitive, and Carol often found herself in rooms full of performers who looked more polished, had better wardrobes, and came from more stable backgrounds. She couldn't match their elegance, but she had something they didn't, her own brand of humor. She could make people laugh in unexpected ways, blending physical comedy with sincerity. She wasn't afraid to make herself look silly if it made the audience happy. That willingness to be vulnerable became her greatest asset. Her break with Once Upon a Mattress came almost by accident. The role of Princess Winifred was originally small, but when Carol got on stage, she transformed it. She didn't just say the lines, she threw herself into them, using exaggerated expressions and comedic timing that felt fresh. Audiences loved her instantly. The producers noticed people were buying tickets just to see the girl who played Winifred. Before long, the show moved to Broadway, and Carol was nominated for a Tony Award. She didn't win, but it didn't matter. She had arrived. With Broadway success came television opportunities. Carol's appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show and the Jack Paar program introduced her to a national audience. Her sense of humor felt approachable, as though she was in on the joke with you instead of performing at you. That warmth became her signature. Joining The Gary Moore Show in 1959 gave her steady work and allowed her to experiment with different characters. It was here she created her famous charwoman persona, the cleaning lady with a big heart and an observant eye. This character, with her mop, bucket, and shuffling walk, became so iconic that it later became the symbol for The Carol Burnett Show. While her career was moving forward, her personal life was shifting. Her marriage to Don Saroyan ended in 1962, just months before her Emmy win and her hugely successful special with Julie Andrews. That show, Julie and Carol at Carnegie Hall, brought in more than 17 million viewers and proved that two women could headline a variety program and make it a hit, a rare thing in the male-dominated TV world of the 1960s. Carol's second marriage to Joe Hamilton in 1963 blended love and work. Joe was not just her husband but also a producer who believed deeply in her vision. However, he also came with a large family, 8 children from his previous marriage. When Carol and Joe had 3 daughters together, that made 11 kids in the household at one point. Life at home was a constant swirl of activity, homework at the kitchen table, laundry piled high, meals cooked in huge pots, and the noise of children echoing through the halls. In December 1963, she gave birth to her first daughter, Carrie. Jody followed in January 1967, and Erin was born in August 1968. In between those joyful arrivals, Carol experienced heartbreak. In 1965, she had a miscarriage just 9 weeks into her pregnancy. It was a private pain she rarely spoke about, choosing instead to pour herself into work. Her professional life took a major leap in 1967 when The Carol Burnett Show premiered on CBS. It was a variety show that combined sketch comedy, musical numbers, and celebrity guests. At the time, network executives were hesitant. Variety shows were usually hosted by men, and they weren't sure audiences would tune in for a female host. Carol proved them wrong almost immediately. The show became a hit, running for 11 seasons and earning 25 Emmy Awards. One of the reasons the show stood out was Carol's generosity with the spotlight. She didn't need to be the star of every sketch. She gave her cast, Harvey Korman, Vicki Lawrence, Tim Conway, room to shine. That team spirit built a loyal following among viewers who felt like they were watching friends having fun together. But not all was smooth behind the scenes. During the show's 7th season, one longtime cast member began treating guest stars poorly, mocking them in front of the crew. Carol confronted the behavior, and things escalated until there was a physical altercation. The incident shocked the entire production team. Carol, who valued professionalism and kindness, felt deeply betrayed. Though the two continued to work together for a time, their relationship never fully recovered. Her home life during those years was a balancing act. She would finish taping a show and rush home to have dinner with the family, only to be pulled away for production meetings or costume fittings. There were moments of joy, family vacations, birthday parties, nights spent singing together in the living room, but there were also moments of exhaustion and emotional strain. As her daughters grew older, Carol's role as a mother became even more complex. Carrie, her eldest, began struggling with addiction at the age of 13. Carol tried everything: therapy, rehab, long talks, tough love. She even admitted Carrie to rehab against her will at one point, knowing it would make her angry but believing it might save her life. Carrie eventually found sobriety, and for a time, things seemed better. But in 2002, tragedy struck when Carrie died at just 38 years old from pneumonia caused by lung cancer. Carol was devastated. She later described Carrie as one of the bravest people she'd ever known, someone who faced her illness with strength and humor until the end. Her marriage to Joe Hamilton also came to an end in 1984 after years of working together and raising their blended family. The pressures of the entertainment industry, combined with the challenges of such a large household, eventually took their toll. Despite the divorce, they continued to collaborate professionally for a time. By the 1980s and 1990s, Carol's career had expanded beyond television variety. She took on roles in films, guest starred on shows, and performed in stage productions. She appeared in dramatic roles as well as comedic ones, proving her range as an actress. In later years, she lent her voice to animated films, appeared in specials, and continued to make guest appearances on television. Throughout her career, Carol never forgot the stranger who had loaned her the money to start her journey. She repaid him exactly on time and kept her promise never to reveal his name. More importantly, she honored the third condition of his gift, helping others. She quietly provided scholarships to young performers and gave financial support to struggling artists without seeking recognition. Even after decades in the spotlight, Carol's warmth remained genuine. When fans wrote to her, she often wrote back. She would end her shows with her trademark ear tug, a silent hello to her grandmother, who had supported her when no one else could. It was a small gesture, but one that reminded everyone watching that her success was built on love, gratitude, and persistence. Her life had been full of extremes: poverty and wealth, heartbreak and triumph, loneliness and adoration. Through it all, Carol Burnett never stopped finding ways to make people laugh, even when her own life was heavy with loss. She believed in the healing power of humor, in the ability of a shared laugh to bridge differences and make people feel less alone. That's why her story resonates so deeply. It's not just the story of a talented woman who became a television icon, it's the story of someone who took every hardship, every rejection, and every bit of pain, and turned it into something that could make the world a little brighter. Carol Burnett's path to becoming one of the most beloved names in television comedy was anything but overnight, even though it might have looked that way to the public when her big break finally came. In the early years of her career, she took on a range of odd and sometimes forgettable roles that slowly built her reputation. She played Buddy Hackett's awkward girlfriend on Stanley and appeared as a contestant on early game shows like Pantomime Quiz. These jobs weren't glamorous, and some were downright strange, but each one taught her something, added to her experience, and put her in front of more people. By the time her 1962 television special aired, audiences saw what seemed like a sudden success. In truth, it had taken almost 10 years of hustle, strange gigs, and small moments to reach that point. The turning point came on September 11, 1967. CBS executives didn't want Burnett to host her own variety show. They preferred the idea of her starring in a standard sitcom called Here's Agnes. But Carol had something they hadn't counted on, a clause in her contract from earlier work that gave her the right to create and star in one season of any kind of show she wanted. She decided to use that clause, and it changed television history. The result was The Carol Burnett Show, which went on to air 279 episodes over 11 years, filmed at CBS Television City's Studio 33. It became a landmark in TV history, and no woman had ever hosted a primetime variety show before. Burnett broke that barrier and never looked back. From the start, she did things differently. Each episode began with her walking out on stage to take questions from the audience, an idea that had started as an accident. A producer had once sent her out early as a joke, but the audience loved it so much that it became a permanent feature of the show. Viewers asked her anything: how she got started, who her favorite co-stars were, or even begged her to do her famous Tarzan yell. Burnett answered with humor, honesty, and warmth, creating a personal connection that made the audience feel like they truly knew her. Even today, during her live stage shows, she still takes questions from the audience, keeping that beloved tradition alive. Her impact wasn't just in her personality, she created unforgettable characters that lived on long after the sketches ended. There was the charwoman, a silent, humble janitor with a mop and big dreams, and Eunice, the loud, exasperated daughter in the recurring family sketches, who later became central to the spin-off Mama's Family. Burnett's face was one of her greatest tools, able to shift from sadness to shock to pure joy in a heartbeat. She and her cast also made unforgettable parodies of famous films, including the legendary Went with the Wind sketch, which is still considered one of television's funniest moments. These sketches didn't just make people laugh, they redefined what television comedy could be. The recognition poured in. Over its 11 seasons, The Carol Burnett Show earned 25 Primetime Emmy Awards from 70 nominations, including 3 wins for Outstanding Variety Series. Burnett herself became such an icon that the Golden Globes later created a Lifetime Achievement Award in her name, which she received while still alive, a rare honor. She was also surrounded by a cast that became legendary in their own right. Harvey Korman, already an established comedy star from The Danny Kaye Show, became one of her strongest partners on screen. Vicki Lawrence was just a teenager when she sent Burnett a fan letter, leading to an audition that changed her life. Lyle Waggoner, who had once auditioned for Batman, became the show's announcer and straight man. Tim Conway, originally just a guest performer, joined the cast full-time in 1975 and became famous for his ability to stretch a joke with perfectly timed silences and awkward stumbles. Together, their chemistry created moments of magic that are still studied in acting and comedy classes today. But even in a workplace built on laughter, tensions sometimes ran high. By the show's 7th season, Harvey Korman's mood and behavior had shifted. Guest stars noticed it, too. During one week with Tim Conway and singer Petula Clark, Korman openly criticized sketches during rehearsal, called ideas stupid, and barely acknowledged Clark. Carol, who had built a reputation for kindness and avoiding conflict, reached her limit. She walked into Korman's dressing room and calmly told him his behavior was unacceptable. She expected him to listen, but instead he lashed out, told her to stay out of his business, and even said he'd rather quit than change. When she stood her ground, he pushed her out into the hallway and slammed the door. The confrontation shocked her. She had worked with him for years and had never experienced anything like it. Needing strength, she imagined herself channeling the toughness of actresses like Joan Crawford and Barbara Stanwyck. With that mental image, she went back to his dressing room and told him she had called his agent. He was fired. Korman didn't believe her at first, but when he saw the seriousness in her eyes, he realized she meant it. The fight seemed to drain from him, replaced by regret. He asked for another chance, a week, to prove he could be professional and pleasant. Carol agreed, but only if he stayed cheerful the entire time. He did, not just for that week but for the rest of the show's run. They remained close friends until his death in 2008, and Carol later said that moment of confrontation may have saved both their friendship and the show itself. Behind the scenes, Carol was dealing with struggles that were far more painful than any workplace conflict. Her eldest daughter, Carrie, began using drugs at just 13 years old. It wasn't limited to one substance. Carrie tried alcohol, marijuana, heroin, cocaine, and more. By 15, she was already in her third rehabilitation program. Carol and her husband, Joe Hamilton, did everything they could, but nothing seemed to work. In 1979, the press found out about Carrie's struggles, and People magazine labeled it Carol Burnett's nightmare. Carol later said those years felt like walking through fire without any way to put out the flames. Somehow, Carrie pulled through. She got sober, stayed that way for over a decade, and dedicated herself to helping others by visiting schools and speaking about addiction. She turned her own pain into a message of hope for others. But the stress of those years had taken a toll on Carol and Joe's marriage. By 1982, they were living apart, and in 1984 they divorced. Their split was another deep heartbreak for Carol, coming after years of shared creativity and success. Joe Hamilton's health declined in the years after the divorce. In 1991, he died at just 62 from cancer that had spread through his head and neck. Despite their split, he and Carol had remained in touch, especially for the sake of their children. Hamilton had been a genius producer with 20 Emmy nominations and 5 wins, but his final years were shadowed by personal loss, divorce, and illness. His death left a hole in Carol's life and in the television industry. Then came the most devastating loss of all. On January 20, 2002, Carrie Hamilton died at the age of 38. After years of sobriety, she was diagnosed with cancer that began in her lungs and spread to her brain. Complications from pneumonia followed, and the young woman who had fought so hard to rebuild her life was gone. At the time, she and Carol had been working together on a Broadway play called Hollywood Arms. Even in her final months, Carrie kept writing and dreaming. Carol later said losing Carrie felt like losing half of herself, but she carried her daughter's strength and determination with her every day. Years before Carrie's death, in 1988, the two had traveled together to Moscow to help start the first Alcoholics Anonymous group in the Soviet Union. At the time, there were over 4 million registered alcoholics in the country, most of whom had never heard of AA. Carol and Carrie spent hours taking calls from people desperate for help. Soviet television even aired Carol's film Life of the Party to more than 90 million viewers. For Carrie, who was still in the early years of her own recovery, it was a chance to turn her struggles into a lifeline for strangers across the world. While Carol faced the loss of her daughter, she also experienced a painful rift with someone who had been like family to her, Vicki Lawrence. The two had been inseparable on The Carol Burnett Show, and their chemistry had been a huge part of its success. But after Mama's Family became its own series, things changed. The show was produced by Joe Hamilton, and after Carol's divorce from him, she distanced herself from anything connected to him. That included the show and, unfortunately, Vicki. Vicki later revealed that Carol had been deeply hurt by her decision to stay on Mama's Family after the divorce, and the silence between them wasn't temporary, it lasted for years. Carol moved to Maui, stayed out of the public eye, and cut off contact with many people who had been part of her professional circle. Vicki recalled that Carol had essentially divorced all of us who were involved with him. One of the most difficult moments came when Carol called Vicki's home one evening, but instead of asking to speak to her, she asked for Vicki's husband, Ul Schultz. Vicki, shocked, asked her son if Carol wanted to talk to her, and the answer was no. The memory stayed with her for years. Carol had promised during that call, "I'll be back," but it took a long time for that promise to come true. It wasn't until after Joe Hamilton's death in 1991 that Carol and Vicki began to rebuild their friendship. Over time, the distance disappeared, and by 2023, Vicki said they were closer than ever. Their reunion for Apple TV+'s Palm Royal felt like things had come full circle. Vicki spoke about how much she had learned from Carol over the years, not just about performing, but about resilience and joy in the face of hardship. Even in her 90s, Carol's career hasn't slowed down. In 2022, she joined the final season of Better Call Saul, playing Marion, a role that became central to the downfall of the show's main character, Saul Goodman. She wasn't just a nostalgic guest star, she was a crucial part of the story. Then in 2024, she stepped into another major role in Palm Royal, holding her own alongside younger stars and proving that her comedic and dramatic skills were as sharp as ever. When asked why she still works, her answer was simple: she still has fun doing it. The same joy that lit up television screens for decades continues to drive her, and she has no plans to stop unless the joy disappears.